Hi everyone, Brian Love, Head of Banking and Fintech at Travillian. And today's podcast is brought to you by Travillian and Alden's Next Forum, October 8th and 9th in Philadelphia at the Union League. If you're looking for what's next in banking, leadership, innovation, and strategy, you gotta be there. The Next Forum is the go-to platform where bold ideas meet the people shaping the future of community and regional banking. From exclusive interviews and rising executives to real talk on talent, tech, and transformation, this is where the next generation of bank leadership takes center stage. Explore more at www.thenextforum.com. The future isn't waiting, and neither should you. So reach out to me, blove@travilliangroup.com to learn more and check out the website. Thank you. And now, this. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Brian Love, Head of Banking and Fintech at Travillian, and I have the privilege of working with some of the most forward-thinking leaders in the community bank space every day of my life. Today, I'm joined by two exceptional CEOs who did the unthinkable. They started brand new banks in the modern regulatory, economic, and competitive environment. We'll be exploring the why behind their decisions, who they're serving, what they've learned, and whether starting a bank in the U.S. today is crazy, necessary, whatever. We'll get into all of that. And ever since I started started as a community bank recruiter almost 10 years ago, I've always followed de novo banks and the replenishment rate in this age of M&A. So this is just a topic that I'm so excited about. So joining me today first is Lori Maley, President and CEO of Bank of Bird in Hand, located in the heart of Pennsylvania's Lancaster County. Founded in 2013, Bank of Bird in Hand became the first de novo bank approved post-financial crisis. And Lori has led it with an unshakable commitment to community, agriculture, and personalized service. Lori, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
By the way, Lori is about an hour from me as the crow flies. I'm outside of Reading, and she's about an hour from me. Much further than an hour from me is the other guest on our podcast, which is Keith Costello, CEO of Locality Bank in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Keith co-founded Locality in 2021 to bring digital-first banking back to the local business community. His mission: empower small businesses and entrepreneurs in South Florida with modern tools and community-rooted service. Keith, thank you as well for joining us.
Great to be here, Brian. Thank you. And great to be here with Lori, too, whose career I've followed when she first started.
Thank you.
And I look at Lori, and by the way, Lori and I used to work with each other in a bank of the past, but I look at Lori in some degree, although we just found out, Keith, you're also an OG in this de novo space, because Bank of Bird in Hand was begun and originated in a time when I think you said there was a 3-year desert of new banks after the post-financial crisis. So, I mean, let's kind of rewind the clock. And launching a de novo, Lori, is no small feat. What inspired your bank, Bank of Bird in Hand, to open its doors way back when?
So what happened was there were some small community banks that did cater to what we call the plain community, which is Amish and Mennonite. And what we found happened in this area is they were bought by larger banks. And so it really removed that small bank niche. The Amish have a need for certain things to be done differently. They have education to 8th grade level. Some do not have a photo ID. Most do not have a photo ID. They have a birth certificate and they have social security card, but they can't be identified by a picture ID. So when we looked at that, we found there was a true need for a community bank that understood the Amish, had the products that the Amish needed and wanted. And basically the fact that, that this community is so tight knit, and the loss of that community bank really drove some of these Amish, really some leaders in the Amish community to really rally around the idea of a startup bank. And we actually, believe it or not, we have a board of 10 people. 2 of us are internal, so 8 are independent outside the bank, and 4 of those directors are Amish. Wow. And so that brings that whole perspective to our everyday operations. They're very involved. The board is very involved. It's an excellent board. It's a board that has focus on the community. Very, very unusual circumstances to what I had seen in the past.
Yeah. Well, and we actually, Travillian has worked with Bank of Bird in Hand way back, and your tombstone in our pitch book always seemed to be one of the more interesting, just because the name of the bank, Bird in Hand, is such a kind of unique, maybe funny name to some. But I remember when I drove there, right next to the branch, the headquarters is this huge horse and buggy stable, so that the Amish can park their buggies and horses next to the branch. And just that alone, like, kind of blew my mind. So it's just such a unique community you're serving. Keith, I wanted to, get you in on this conversation. Tell us a little bit about Locality Bank and how you came to be. And by the way, you told us before this call that this isn't your first rodeo, so to speak. So feel free to talk about, even what you did before that.
Okay, so I'll go back to the first bank that I started, which was Broward Bank of Commerce. And that was, we opened in actually January 12th of 2009. And I remember the date exactly because we opened January 12th of 2022, with Locality Bank. But, we remember 2009, and, it was actually, we were the second to last bank to open before the FDIC shut everything off. Wow. And, and then again, Lori's bank was the first. And I remember when they opened, I was like, oh my gosh, they're doing, the Novos are starting again. Unfortunately, it wasn't the way that we knew they were opening before the great financial crisis. So I know everybody said, there used to be 100 to 200 or 100 to 120 de novos a year, and then it trickled down to 6 to 7. But with Locality, what happened was, interestingly enough, so we sold Broward Bank of Commerce, and the second last bank to open in the state of Florida in 2009 was a bank called First Green Bank, and Ken LaRoe started that bank. And so after I sold Broward Bank of Commerce, I had a non-compete, and Ken reached out. He said, well, why don't you come in and become the CEO of First Green, and we'll open in South Florida. So we did that, and we were successful, and we grew, helped Ken grow that bank in South Florida as well. And then we ended up selling that bank in October of 2018. So I had another non-compete for a couple of years. And during that time, we all remember what happened, COVID and the PPP program. And so I was kind of on I'm thinking about, what am I going to do? Am I going to retire? And I started getting all kinds of phone calls from people during the PPP program, old customers who were, not only could they not get money, they couldn't get a phone call back. And, those who were I wasn't in business then, but I know a lot of the bankers that I talked to are like, yeah, it was crazy that it just couldn't handle all the requests. Now, what I did notice is, the big businesses were all being taken care of. That wasn't a problem. The problem was during times of crisis, and it was just like 2009. The big institutions took care of the big customers. That's who they serve. And that's in a crisis when you can only take care of so many people, you're going to take care of your biggest, most profitable customers first. It's natural. So the smaller businesses get left behind. So we took a look at Broward County, which is where Fort Lauderdale is located in South Florida. And in 2015, there were 11 banks that were headquartered in Broward County. By 2020, there were only 3. So all those banks had been acquired during that period of time. And then you also went from 11 billion in deposits among local banks during that period of time down to 600 million in deposits. So it's just a drastic drop in the number and also the amount of clients that were being served by these community banks. So that was kind of our call was, that's a problem that needs to be solved. So we went to the local business community and said, do you want, and I had some people that had worked with me in the past, and I had 2 co-founders, Corey LeBlanc, who I think you guys know, Brian, as you mentioned, and Drew Sato, who worked with me at First Green. And we went to the community and said, we can start another bank if you want us to. Will you support it? And that's how we started our capital raise. And that was how we ended up starting the bank. And really our mission is to empower local companies to maximize their potential. I know a lot of people say small companies, small, medium-sized, SMBs, but I think nobody wants to be referred to as small. But if you say local, people get it, and most local companies are small, medium-sized businesses. So that we thought was a nice way to say that those are the people we want to help.
Oh, that's great. And actually the tie that binds both of your stories is not just serving these, smaller communities, but there's M&A that creates opportunity. And so, it seems like it's warming up again these days. I keep seeing, more and more announcements. I put them on LinkedIn and everyone's, all a chatter. I'm kind of curious, I want to look at your banks in this current moment. How has the growth been? Lori, you've been around a lot longer. You're no longer considered a de novo bank. I'd love to kind of hear about the de novo period. It was like a 7-year period where there's a microscope, but during that 7-year period, they cut it down to 3 to help you, maybe grow and take the guardrails off a little bit for you. Talk to me about, as you're kind of maturing as a bank, how that's been. And by the way, there's so many little facets about Lori's bank that are so unique. I'm not sure we're going to be able to fit them all. But yeah, I'd love to hear how the growth has been now that you can look back on almost over 10 years of growth.
So it was really amazing. When we started out, as you mentioned, 7 years was de novo. So us coming out of the gate, we were the first one that was under this 7-year de novo period. And I'm sure as Keith could recognize, like that was so restrictive. You couldn't raise capital in the first 3 years. Like they pretty much told us from the FDIC, do not come back to us and ask for capital. So, you have losses in the first couple of years. And so that drains your capital a bit. Our order when we came out of the gate was 16 to 20 million. We were able to raise 17 million and we cut it off. We probably should have kept it open a little bit longer to bring a little bit more capital in, but
it's just from the community you raised this?
So there were 200 original shareholders, a lot of which were Amish. So it was, friends and family of the board and the community. Some of the connections went beyond Pennsylvania, some of the friends and family, but we really started with that core of 200 shareholders. And it was a difficult period because, coming out of the gate first and having this 7-year time frame over your head, what we found is we opened the doors and they came. And so the growth was fast and furious. And, we didn't advertise. We didn't have to advertise, especially on the loan side. The deposits, they would come with the deposits as they came for the loan volume. But, they were really looking for the agricultural loans. A lot of the larger and medium-sized banks in this area. Yeah. Some do ag, but we have a chief lending officer, Bill O'Brien, who the Amish call the Gelt Chappie, which means money man. And so he was given that name by a little Amish girl 30 years ago. Bill went to the house and knocked on the door of the house, the Amish house, and the mother was in the kitchen and said to the little girl, "Who's at the front door?" And the little girl says, "It's the Gelt Chappie." And so
Gelt Chappie.
The Gelt Chappie. So Bill was named that many years ago. But, what we found is we had that niche for this particular group. Although I think as we grew and we matured, we became more of a total community bank. At first they were kind of titling us as the Amish bank, and that really wasn't what we were. A community bank that had that focused niche on the Amish. And so, we had so many people saying, "Put your bank here," which I know probably sounds crazy to most people. People don't ask bankers to put their bank there, but we had a draw from some really, really rural areas. So what we had to do is come up with an idea. And what we came up with was what we call now the Gelt Bus, which is literally an RV on wheels. It's full service branch, does everything you could do in a brick and mortar building. And so we started out in 2018 with a bus that serviced about 10 areas, 10 locations. It was about a half a day at each location. And so that took on and took off so well that we ended up expanding our fleet. We have currently 3 buses that service. We're in Chester County, Lancaster, Berks. And so the great thing about the Gelt Bus is it's a tuning fork. So it'll show you where are those really high concentrations of deposits? Where's the need for brick and mortar? And so for us, it's been kind of a dual thing that we've used it for that, as well as, trying to get out to these very rural communities. And so we actually have one bus coming online. I'm just doing the application today for the FDIC and Department of Banking. And so we should get approval for that relatively soon. And then June, we'll put bus number 4 out on the street. So in that time, based on our core competence of, using the bus as a lead, putting branches, we now have 7 branches in key areas that were really driven by the volumes of the bus. We've grown to $1.7 billion in assets today. And, it's remarkable when you think about it. We didn't have acquisitions. It's pure organic growth.
Right.
And I think nothing speaks to the need for a bank more than that type of growth. And like I said, it expanded. The Amish have familial relationships, in this area. So some of them moved to Upper Dauphin, which is north of Harrisburg. And so then, they said, "Put your bank here." We met with them. We moved into that area. And so that's been kind of a springboard for us. German Baptists up in Berks County said, "Hey, we would like you to bring your bank here." And so we started with a bus there. And it has just been a great opportunity for us to look at those communities. And honestly, even communities that are, where our Amish population is concentrated in certain areas, these other Amish areas, we've actually had reach out from them. I had reach out from one particular person 3 times in Cumberland County, and he wants to build us a shed. He said, "Can you just put your bank in a shed?" And I said, "Well, we have to see about that." So
no brick or mortar.
No brick or mortar. And, we would like to lead with a bus, but production time on the buses is over a year. So to try to get to an area quickly, we either need some type of we had an old bus we retired, but it's really not fit to put out on the road anymore. So we really need to look for maybe a small boutique location. And so, we get those calls all the time. Put your bus here, put your bank here. And so it's a little bit of a different business model.
Oh, yeah.
Where the customers kind of come to you and say, we need you here.
Well, yeah, I'm thinking about the contrast between, Keith's foray into technology and digital, and then, the contrast between you going in, with trucks, but actually retrofitting them to becoming branches. Both to me are super innovative. Keith, I'd love to hear how Locality has focused on technology and digital to grow itself, and take us through what your growth has been like the last few years.
Sure. So when we decided to start, we also did not want to do a traditional model because we just saw so many things changing. I mean, I saw them at First Green as we were selling. There's so many things I wanted to be able to do and compete with that were not available to most community banks through the traditional cores. And so we ended up going with Nimbus, which is, more of it's cloud-based open architecture core. Yep. So it was very kind of unique in terms of their offerings. Key to our technology area also was the recruitment of Corey LeBlanc, who, we really, most community banks have an IT person, right? It's not really what you would call a chief technology person or chief digital who really understand those things. So Corey jumped in from the very beginning, moved his family here from Louisiana. It had a very nice job with a large publicly traded bank in Louisiana, and kind of jumped into this thing with Drew and I. And, so he was able to bring those skills that we needed in terms of evaluating the technology and being able to build out really an amazing platform. Our online and our app and our core banking, online systems, I think are as good as anything out there in the market, including, what the larger institutions have. So our growth has been, if you look, just to make it very simple, so we're about $300 million after 3 years. So we've really grown about $100 million a year. We raised initially about $38 million in capital, and we issued one warrant for every 2 shares that everybody purchased on the initial offering. So, and those warrants just came due in January of this year. So we had so we brought in another about $15 million from the exercise of those warrants, at the original price of $10 a share, but no outside shareholders at all. Really local. We do have some people we have a small group out of Ohio that also invested, but other than that, it's really all, there's no institutions, it's all individual shareholders, primarily here in South Florida. And so, with that extra capital, we're looking forward to continuing the growth. And, we'd love to be at 1.7 billion in 10 years. That's really phenomenal growth that you've achieved, Lori.
Thank you.
Well, and so again, I'm the talent piece, which is, that's, myself, Keith Daly, our bread and butter. There's another reference to dairy, Amish dairy, but our bread and butter is really, it's finding the diamonds in the rough to take leaps of faith, right? Sometimes we've been able to wrestle really big unicorns out of bigger entities and join organizations that they didn't know about, that weren't even on their radars. And Keith, that moment where you were trying to wrestle Corey, I think we were also talking to Corey about some other things. So you won out on the Corey sweepstakes, but that is such an interesting thing to just dissect. And Lori, I know that I've followed some of the recruiting you've done as well. So I wanted to ask you both about, what are you looking for? Like, sometimes you need to look for entrepreneurs and not just like full-time employees. Like, what are the competencies that you're looking for in your people, or the traits that you're looking for your people, where if they don't possess them, they will not really survive in a de novo, in a brand new kind of business setting? Go ahead, Keith. I'll let you respond first.
So I think I didn't come up with this, but you're looking for missionaries versus mercenaries. You really need people who buy into the purpose of what you're doing in a community bank, because you're not going to, you're really not going to be able to lure somebody with more money, especially as a de novo, right? Because you're trying to keep your costs down, and
there's no pre-existing brand. even really,
And there's no right. So they've really got to be, as you said, Brian, they've got to be entrepreneurial to some degree. And well, even more than some, I would say. And when we talk about our bank, that is one thing that we stress is, we talk to business owners. We're like, we are entrepreneurs, not just me and Drew and Corey, the founders, but everybody who works here is an entrepreneur, because you have to have that same mentality to go into a startup, because nobody knows how these things will work out when you jump in. Nobody knows what the future could be, and so they are risk takers to some degree, because they could all get a job at some large bank and just work in that environment. So I think you've got to find people who do buy into that. One thing that we have done that I'm very proud of is everybody who works here every year. So they're all owners. They all have options. So everybody we've granted stock options to, because that, I think, if you want people to perform like owners, it makes sense to make them owners also, right? And so that's been huge, I think, for us.
Lori, same question to you.
Yeah, I think it depends on the stage of your life cycle. I think you initially, in that initial hiring for the Novo, you like to hire people that have had de novo experience if you can, because that's so critical. I had done another de novo bank back in 2003, so I understood. They came after me hard, and I actually started as CFO. I'm a CPA. I came up through the CFO side of the business. And so, I think it's so hard because there's so much uncertainty in the beginning that the challenge to hire people is so critical. And then I think there's other challenges as you grow to hire people, because when you grow so fast, the people that you have, sometimes the bank outgrows them.
Yeah.
The level of talent. And so I think as we got bigger, it's interesting that you use the word unicorn, because we use that a lot here. I think we have, at least, on the executive team, we have about 6 unicorns right now. And so to try to keep finding that level of people, as well as to find people in the lower levels that serve your customers and really follow the culture of the bank and, that service mentality that we have. So, it's a real challenge. I think right now we probably sit with the best team that we've ever had. And I know, as Keith, you said, it's these people, it's not about the money. I know there's people on this team that can make a lot more money, but they're really committed to the bank and the culture and the community. And so to find all of those valuable pieces of each of these people in one person is really remarkable. To find a whole bank load of those people is even more remarkable. And I think, we've been able to find that at all levels. We have unicorns at all levels.
How many, if I could just ask a question, how many people do you have, Lori?
Right now we have about 160. We started with 10.
Yeah, we did too. We're at about 42 right now.
So we have 5 of the original 10 still here. Some retired. Unfortunately, some passed away. So, the core, we still have 5 of the core people.
Wow.
Yeah, that's great. And obviously what you said, I wrote a little bit of an article about banks all over the country right now are outgrowing their talent just because of the economic trends and the things that the industry is having to deal with. There's a lot of people have not been through things like this. So we've seen banks, even in the CFO seat and other seats in the house, there's a gravitation towards different skill sets that weren't historically needed or could be, overlooked or groomed over time. So I hear you. And it's just interesting to hear that in a more compact time period, you're having to kind of do it real time. Let me change gears a little bit, because I brought up my little tracker of banks and organization, and I count about 8 that have actually have filed this year. So that's actually nice to see. I really wanted to hear your take, because who better than you, than Keith and Lori, to tell us a little bit more about what the process was like, and what these folks need to be aware of. And if someone's watching that's considering doing it in the second part of this year, what's your take? And then how also are you involved in the conversations with the legislation behind the scenes? Love to hear that. Keith, if you want to go first.
So interestingly enough, Florida is leading the country in new bank formations right now. And another interesting thing, I think, is there's another bank that was formed right in Fort Lauderdale.
Wow.
And there's just another one that opened in Miami recently called Bank
Miami. And Gala Bank is the other one in Ocala.
I'm not familiar with Gala Bank, but are they an organization?
Evermore.
Evermore in Fort Lauderdale, yes.
No, so I'm looking, actually, there's 3 in Florida, and also Gulf Coast Business Bank, if you go back to 2022. There's 4. So that's a good sign.
Yes, so we have had quite a few, but just rate. So what does that tell you? So this market is obviously a very strong market, right? There's been a lot of consolidation here. Banks want to be here, and so it continues. We continue to lose banks to consolidation, and so as a result of that, I think the economics are there to drive new bank formation, which I think if you And a lot of people say, "Oh, why haven't we had more de novo banks?" Well, I think there's a lot of reasons, but and a lot of it is regulatory and the process that you have to go through, and the capital raising has been increased from when I know the first bank I did, it was $12.5 million. This time it was more than double that. So, and Lori, how about you? How much did you guys have to raise when you started?
The order was 16 to 20. We raised 17. Yeah.
And that was an increase from when I had done one in 2009, and probably 2003, it was probably a few $1 million, right?
Yeah.
When you did that one. So these increased capital requirements have made it much more difficult for banks to be started. And I think since Dodd-Frank, what you've also had is you've had a tremendous amount of more regulatory burden placed on banks. We're starting to see that start to change. Certainly now, there's a lot going on in Washington in terms of discussion about how can we make de novo bank opening easier. The Financial Services Committee Chairman, French Hill, has said, I want to make community banking great again. I mean, that's music to our ears. Our last trip to Washington with the Florida Bankers Association was one of the best we've ever had. We heard in Tim Scott, who chairs the Senate Banking Committee, also very pro community banking. First time you're starting to hear these types of things coming out of Washington. And then on the regulatory side, we have seen some movement in terms of consolidation. We have more, I think, with Travis Hill, certainly at FDIC, you have a much more forward-thinking leader, even though he's only acting. But he was with Jelena McWilliams when she was there, and she was a very forward-thinking leader. So all these things are encouraging, I think. And there's a lot of initiatives. We have at ICBA, we have a de novo bank committee, which we formed, where we're trying to provide guidance to new bank organizations that are out there wanting to start. We're also trying to impact legislation, regulation. We have, as I just mentioned prior to us starting the podcast, the Florida Bankers Association has started a de novo task force because we have quite a few de novos here. And we're trying to figure out how can we help to create more de novo bank formation. And I think, we're just now beginning to kind of come up with some ideas. But I think the biggest idea that we can look at in terms of how do we create more? Make it more economically viable. Make it something so it's not so difficult, and so that people can make money doing it without so much regulation. If we lighten that burden and you allow people to make money, believe me, you'll have banks popping up all over the place. So that would be the one thing I would stress in terms of looking at how we move forward with that.
Lori, love your take and also what you're doing, to educate and to maybe, help modify for the better the de novo process.
Yeah, I mean, Keith, you hit a lot of great points. I think for us in Pennsylvania, when we started the bank, there were no new banks in Pennsylvania in 5 years. Now it's 16 years later, and we're still the only startup bank. So again, the bar is very high, and I think until that really is addressed, the bank I started in 2003, I needed 8.3 million in capital. 10 years later, we needed 16 to 20. Keith, after your startup, you needed it's almost doubling, every time you go. And, the issue is you do burn through capital in the first couple of years. You know that's going to happen. And, you try to lessen, the effect of that. But obviously, you understand that's going to happen. But it is this having to have all of this additional, these positions that require, your compliance, your BSA, that require that outlay of personnel and capital. It is substantial. And, from my perspective, I actually served on the FDIC advisory board when Yelena McWilliams was there. And she was trying to shorten initially the application period, because what they found is, someone would apply, like for example, us when we applied, and like 16 months later, you would get the charter. And so their thought was, you have people that are stepping back from their day jobs. And so they have, 16 months of when they're not viably employed. And so I think that kept a lot of people out of it. And, the applications were voluminous when we did it. I'm not sure it's any easier now. If you look at the guide to de novo banking, we actually wrote that. As we went through the process, they took some of the things that happened to us and things that we went through. I mean, we did 5 business plans over those first couple of years, because every time we grew, we kind of blew the plan away. And so that was not necessarily a good thing to them, because, technically you need to operate in accordance with the plan. It's part of the order. And so, I think they worked really well with us, the initial FDIC group. A lot of our stuff, it would go to New York, FDIC, but then it would go to Washington. So whereas in the past, some of the local decision making had been at the regional banks, everything went to Washington. And so that held up the process. And, even when we started, there was still a little bit of that going on where, I think people were still nervous with startup banks. It was a challenge. One thing, we had 2 proposed banks in Pennsylvania, people that had formed groups, and I had lunch with them, and I introduced them to some of the people at the FDIC in New York to kind of facilitate that, open the pathway. But again, neither took off the ground, because I think it's still back to the same thing. It's difficult to find people that know how to start a de novo bank. It's a great uplift to get capital, to get the application done. And so, unfortunately, those 2 groups went by the wayside. I actually participated in it was called the Symposium, The Future of Banking, last year at the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City. And Mickey Bowman was there. And I served on a panel basically saying, how do we get more new startup banks? And Yelena McWilliams was also on that panel with me. And, unfortunately, you come to the conclusion, until you're able to reduce the regulatory burden, you're able to, have people be able to make money at this. It's not a not-for-profit. You need to make money. Shareholders need appropriate rewards. And so it really complicates it. It makes it more difficult. The additional layers of regulation have really hurt. And so I think the people out there, at the Kansas City Fed that were part of this, they understand, but the question is, how do you fix it? And so I'm hoping some of these initiatives that we've heard about, that people are really going to try, because I do believe we need startup banks. When we opened there were no new banks after us for 18 months. And then Primary Bank out of New Hampshire came out. And boy, we were happy for that because we thought now there's someone else that, they'll have some time to look at those guys instead of us. For us, it was 18 months and nobody else was a new bank. So it really is a challenge. It's a work around the clock all the time thing. You have to get the people to commit to that. And then, you need to get that required financing. And it is Bill always says, that works with us, Bill O'Brien says you run the first marathon, and that's, to get the funding, to get the bank open. Then you start the next marathon, which is to get the bank to profitability. So, you really have a really tough task ahead of you to try to get the bank up, get it moving forward, hire the right people. And so I think until you're able to really get that regulatory burden lessened, it's going to continue to be difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that's the hope with the new administration, that it's going to, over the next couple of years, get easier. We'll see how it plays out. Regulation, it is causing the decrease in de novos. It's also causing an increase in M&A. So it's like, it really is like the big, nail, that everyone's trying to move around. So we'll see how it all plays out. So one of my favorite things to do as a recruiter is really, I love connecting people who don't know each other. And Keith and Lori, you guys never knew each other beforehand. Maybe you knew each other's banks just on paper. So it's wonderful just having you both together, and you're so well versed on this topic. Just wanted to thank you so much for your time. And again, I don't know if you have any final thoughts for our audience about the subject or anything at all, but go for it.
I would just say, it is great to meet Lori, because I do remember when her bank opened. So, Brian, thank you, and thank you for inviting me on. And it's also great to be able to talk about community banking and de novo banking. I can tell Lori feels the same way I do. And we were laughing before we started the podcast about are we crazy or what doing this again? But it is obviously it's a passion. I can tell she has it. I can tell. And that's the beauty of community banking, because people are really passionate about it, because it's not easy, as she said. It's not easy starting a new bank, but it's also not easy operating a small bank in the United States when you're competing with these huge organizations and you don't have the resources and attracting talent, all the things that we go through. So you really, I would say to anybody who's thinking about starting a de novo bank, make sure you really love the business, because otherwise you will not be successful. You won't make it. You've really got to love it to continue to persist and move forward. As Lori was saying, it's not easy. And
Lori, any last minute thoughts?
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Keith. It is definitely, I call it a labor of love. People always say to me, "How many kids do you have?" I say, "I have 2 boys in a bank." And I truly mean it. And I think it's for us people that really start the bank that you have to love it, because it just encompasses so much of your life that if you don't love what you do, it is going to be really tough. It's not going to be a pleasure. And so we've been lucky enough and very blessed in this area to fill that void that really was there. And, and the proof is in the pudding when you see the growth. And so I hope all de novos, including yours, Keith, I'd like to see you be $1 billion at some point. And, I'm a big advocate, let's open. I hoped when we started that we'd open the floodgates, but, instead of the flood, it was a trickle. And so we need to figure out, how do we replace these banks? Our banks do a great service in the community, and I don't know that people fully understand that. It goes beyond just transactions. It's much beyond that.
Well, we're going to get you both back 5 years from now and see where you are at that point. It's like a time capsule. And by the way, Keith, what is your podcast? Let's get a plug for that out here.
Yeah, sure. So it's called Making Bank. Okay. And we have on really mostly local entrepreneurs. So it's all geared towards entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's terrific.
And we've had some great guests on, people who started $1 billion businesses down to, people who are just, starting out. So it's, we enjoy spotlighting these entrepreneurial individuals.
That's great. I think, and I'm going to probably take my little drive out to Lancaster and check out your growth, since I haven't really been out there in 10 years, Lori. So anyway, best to you both in your future endeavors. Again, I'm super passionate about this community bank space too, so I can't thank you enough for taking an hour out of your day. I hope our audience enjoys this. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian.